Hey guys, what's up? Steve here, and I apologize profusely for taking so long since I made my last video to make a new one, especially considering I'm trying to give you guys ideas on what to watch during these trying times, and trying to keep you guys entertained during these trying times. That being said, the past month has been very busy. A lot of stuff has come up, had to do a lot of stuff. With that being said, I did get around to watching something last week that I would really like to tell you guys about. It's a new movie called Host. It's directed by Rob Savage and stars a bunch of people who you probably have never heard of in your lives, but that's definitely not a bad thing in this case. Set in the midst of the lockdown that came about during the pandemic and taking place entirely through the way of a Zoom call, Host follows a group of friends attempting to hold a seance over said Zoom call, only to have things go horribly wrong. I heard about Host because some other movie reviewers have been covering it, but I don't think enough have. And I also heard about it because I recently started my subscription to the streaming service Shudder, which if you don't know, Shudder is a streaming service that specializes in horror movies. They've got a really great library. I've watched a couple of films on there so far, and they're actually pretty good. I'm liking the service so far. And no, I'm not going to consider that a shameless plug because I am not sponsored by Shudder or any of their affiliates. Who the hell would want to sponsor me? Seriously. I went into Host, admittedly, pretty apprehensive. I wasn't sure whether or not it was going to be a good movie or even worth my time, even though it was less than an hour long. And that was basically the reason why. This is a pretty darn short movie. And admittedly, it's operating on a premise that isn't really anything new. But I do have to admit I was really intrigued by this. The movie was shot, edited, and released entirely during the pandemic and during quarantine. And I wanted to see what they were going to do with it under such constraints. And I have to admit, despite my really low expectations, I was pretty impressed. And I think I would have been impressed even if I had relatively high expectations. This is not a perfect movie, and it's by far not the best thing ever. But it's actually really fun, and pretty scary in spots, surprisingly. So for starters, I mentioned in the beginning of this review that this movie stars a bunch of people you probably have never heard of. And I mentioned that's not a bad thing, because I have to admit the performances by these actresses and actors are really good. I will admit there's nothing particularly special about any of the characters, and there's nothing that really makes a lot of them stand out from each other. So that's something that kind of holds it down. But the acting is really good. It really felt like I was watching a bunch of friends on a Zoom call. And when the scary stuff happens, whether it's realistic stuff that could happen or not, the reactions were extremely realistic, and they gave really intense performances that I genuinely liked. As I mentioned before, the movie's plot and the setup aren't particularly original, but these filmmakers make damn sure that they are trying their best to deliver the goods with this. They're really trying to use the idea of setting this as a Zoom call to the best of their ability. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers. Spoiler-free review. But there are definitely some ideas that are related to Zoom and how Zoom calls work that I really liked. For example, the runtime. I mean, Zoom calls don't last that long if you have just a regular setup for Zoom. There's one idea that I particularly liked with the use of filters that I thought was really cool. And there's another even better idea that I really liked. Again, not going to give exactly what it is away, but it involves the use of a custom background. And I'm not going to lie, when it was revealed what that was going to be used for, it scared the shit out of me. And I'm not saying this movie scared me on a primal level. This is definitely like a fun kind of scared. It's a things that go bump in the night type of movie. It's not like Hereditary where it gets you on that under your skin level. This is definitely a more fun, scary stuff popping out type of movie. And usually that's really bad. But in this movie, the jump scares and all these things that are popping out are usually of the things that you're actually supposed to be afraid of. I have a love-hate relationship with horror movies because I usually tend to go more toward the ones that start with something primal and start with something that get under your skin and make you feel genuinely uncomfortable, because that has an impact that is really hard for somebody to make with your story. and I usually find jump scares and things like that really cheap. But in this movie, none of them are cheap. I mean, they're cheaply done, but I guess I should say, instead of cheap, false. None of the jump scares in this movie are false. What I mean by a jump scare is a lot of movies utilize like just a bunch of people investigating something and all of a sudden a friend taps them on the shoulder and you hear this giant loud burst of music, and the only reason why you're scared and the only reason why you jumped is because you just heard a loud sound. In this movie, you jumped because you heard a loud sound and saw something absolutely terrifying, and it was related to the thing you are actually supposed to be afraid of, the actual threat of the movie. And those types of jump scares, when they're done right, which this movie does right, I enjoy those. Now, with that being said, the movie is definitely not perfect. For example, once the shit starts hitting the fan, there are some things that some characters do that are obviously just so we can see them as the viewer, like picking up their laptop or their phone and putting it in front of them and showing us what they see. In a lot of situations, people probably wouldn't actually do that, especially if they're potentially being chased by this demonic presence that they might have just brought about by a seance. But it never really gets to the point where the suspension of disbelief is absolutely unbearable. And I have to admit, I did not like how the film ended, like the very last few scenes. Some of the lead up to that was really good, I will admit, and I was definitely like glued to the screen, wondering what was going to happen next. But the ultimate payoff, I didn't like very much. That does not mean you should stay away from this movie. If you like horror movies and you're up for something that kind of gives you a refreshing release during the times that we're in, and something that's not super serious to watch, go ahead and give this a try. And it's definitely a good example of how you can make something really good under giant constraints. Especially something that people actually got together and made, well, not really got together, virtually got together and made during the pandemic. And it was really refreshing to see that. I'm glad that they did this, because it shows what you can do when you're under the constraints that we're facing now. Alright guys, that's all for today. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. It really helps other people find it, and it helps out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already, and if you want to see more content from me in the future, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you really want to be notified when I post a new video, instead of just, having to go through your feed and find it, go ahead and hit that bell icon so you get notified when I post new content. With all that being said, have a good night, and I'll see you guys later.